Hello, welcome to MoonCon 21. We're the Druid Judes, as have been called by our lovely editor. So we should start off by thanking Trevor Greenfield, the editor, and Rachel Patterson, who's volunteered to do this herself, and her husband Peter, who are doing the technical support, because they normally get forgotten and left off at the end. So we'll start by thanking them. So there's three of us here, Andrew Anderson, Robin Herne, and myself, Brendan Howlin. And what we thought we would do is we'd start off by just telling you a bit about ourselves and our books, and then we'd have a bit of chat and happy to take questions and things. So the sun's just over the yard arm, so pour yourself a Druid delight, settle back and listen to the proceedings. So I think Andrew's going to start telling us about himself and his book. So over to you, Andrew.
Brilliant, thank you. Hello, my name's Andrew Anderson. I'm a Druid, obviously, which is why I'm here. Even though I'm after this morning's talk with Ellen Sentia, I may be becoming an Aldwined. There we go. Maybe becoming one of those. I live in Stratford upon Avon, right opposite Shakespeare's house. So I'm literally right in the middle of everything here. I've been an OBOD Druid since about 2015, and I'm now kind of in the Druid grade, working through that part of the course. I've got two books out with Moon Books. I'll start with the one that I spoke about yesterday. This is forthcoming. This is my new book, Artio and Artemis, A Journey Towards the Celtic Bear Gods. And this is coming out on the 25th of June. And I won't talk too much about that because I did an entire talk yesterday on bears. So if you're interested in bears and bear gods, please, this is coming out soon and the talk is available. My first book with Moon Books was kind of, in Druidic terms, was my Bardic book. And so it's this one. It's been out since 2019. It's called The Ritual of Writing. Writing is a spiritual practice. And I came to write this after working through the Wheel of the Year, the Druid Wheel of the Year, the Pagan Wheel of the Year, and realising that quite often, for me, the festivals weren't quite striking home as I kind of wanted them to. And I realised through some reflection the power of story and storytelling to my own personal belief. So I set about writing some festival tales, and then I wrote this to help people write festival tales of their own, and also thinking about the way that writing is also affected by the Wheel of the Year and other spiritual elements. So yeah, that's me.
Well, thanks, Andrew. And I think Robin's next year, so off you go, Robin.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Robin Herne. I live in the east coast of Britain. I've written about 4 solo authored books with Moon Books, and I think it's somewhere in the region of 5 or 6 contributions towards different anthologies. My first book, the Druidic one, was Old Gods, New Druids, which has been out for quite a few years now, giving an overview of polytheist Druidism, which is the style of Druidry which I practice. Whereas Andrew is a member of OGOD, I am what we laughingly call an independent Druid. In other words, I'm not a member of a particular order, possibly a disordered Druid rather than an ordered one. In terms of the more kind of bardic element, as Andrew was mentioning, my second one was Bardsong, which is a collection of poetry, mostly inspired by Druidry, although there is a chapter on poetry from Greek, Roman, Scandinavian and other sources. It's intended to be a kind of a how-to, and as well as giving examples of my own poetry, I explain to people how to write in Irish metre, in Welsh metre, in early Scandinavian metre and so on. Then I branched into the realm of fiction with A Dangerous Place, which is an anthology of occult, esoteric themed murder mysteries, all set in my hometown, but in different periods of history. So each story leaps forward a few hundred years from the previous one. The very first story is based in the era of the Druids, and the very last story is 21st century, so it kind of jumps forward. But each one has a sort of an occult theme to it. The brand new one is a contribution to the Pantheon series, and this is branching quite away from Druidry to talk about the Egyptian gods and Egyptian mythology. And I've also, as I say, contributed to various different anthologies like Moon Poets, which was quite a half dozen poems in that one, and various chapters in other anthologies that Moon Books has put out over the years. Over to you.
Good, thanks very much. So I'm Brendan Howlin. I live in Guildford in Surrey, which is not only the most populated county in the UK, it's also the most wooded, which is unusual, yeah? So that's very good. And I'm also a member of OBOD. I've been a OBOD tutor for about 20 years or so, yeah? And having helped people struggle through the Bard, Ovate and Druid grades over many years, I found there were lots of things that kept coming up over and over again. So my first contribution from Moon Books was, if I can get it in the screen, the Handbook of Urban Druidry, which came out in 2013. And that was basically a self-help manual about learning to see and experiencing life around you in a druidic way. And the point of it is that most druids, or some druids, aren't fortunate enough to live in a wood or a nice coastal area. So you've got to experience druidry where you live, be it a town or a city as well. And if you happen to go to Hyde Park in London and talk to the policeman who's in charge there, who's called Stephen, he will have this book in his backpack, which is good. And then people said to me, well, you know, that's really kind of a bardic book that you've written. So I then produced the Ovate book, which is the Urban Ovate. And when you've done your fluffy bard and you've experienced things, then you've got to go deep inside yourself and experience the Ovate grade. And most of my tutees are in that part, and it's quite a hard thing to do, but profitable in the end. Then people said, where's the third one? Well, yes, it's still been written, let's say, yeah. So it will appear at some time, I hope, yeah. Anyway, so that's us. You know who we are now, and we need to start chatting, or we can take some questions. I think, Andrew, you wanted to say something about the Wheel of the Year, so do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just wanted to just say about the Wheel of the Year, because obviously it's kind of what informed this. It was what kind of brought me towards Druidry in the first place. I don't come from a particularly pagan background. I was a very bad Wiccan for a very short period of time. And I kind of referred to myself as vaguely pagan for about 5 years before finding the Druid path. And the thing that actually pulled me in was twofold. One was the promise of inspiration to write, because I was a creative writing teacher at the time. And as Brendan will know, as a teacher, when you're trying to inspire other people, quite often it's very difficult to find inspiration yourself. So anything that kind of popped along and said, hey, we will inspire you, that was great. But the one thing I really kind of bought from Wicca and paganism was the love of the Wheel of the Year. You know, I'm that getting in tune with the seasonal cycles strikes me as being one of the most important elements of Druidry. It's kind of right at the core of my belief and kind of my practice. And I was just kind of wondering kind of how it was for the pair of you.
Yeah, most interesting. I mean, I think the Wheel of the Year, as we know, sort of originated in agricultural cycles, but it's not really to do with agricultural cycles. It's to do with how you feel yourself. Yeah. So in the winter, you want to huddle down and hide away. Yeah. So that's quite a natural feeling. In the spring, you want to go out and do things and make things. So that's where you feel like in the spring. In the summer, you're slowing down. You want to bask in the sun, take things easy. And in the autumn, you want to consolidate the things that you've done. And that kind of experience that we all have during the year, I think fits in really well with the Wheel of the Year. Don't know about you, Robin, what do you think?
Well, I mostly celebrate the big four rather than the equinoxes and solstices, which don't have as much significance to me as they do to many other druids these days. I live in I live in a town, but the town itself is situated in a rural part of Britain. So there's still a big emphasis on farming and the needs of the land, the crops, the animals, and so forth. And I do find it interesting that as an agricultural calendar, it is a fusion of crop-based festivals and animal-based festivals like Imbolc and the sheep production, which used to be very, very big in the part of Britain where I live. Not so much these days, but a few hundred years ago, this was a huge wool-producing county. And so there is this big tradition of sheep. I do wonder how druids who live in other parts of the world adapt. There was a talk yesterday on paganism in the southern hemisphere, for example, and that obviously is an issue to discuss, because when we're in winter over here, they're in summer over there, whether you adapt to the local landscape or whether you stick to an ideal that's based in a country you don't live in anymore.
I don't know if you've read it. there's an amazing book by Julie Brett called Australian Druidry, which for me is one of the best books on Druidry that I've read. And thankfully it's a Moon book, so, you know, hey, that's great. But it's what she actually does is in that she recasts the Celtic Wheel of the Year into the Australian seasons. And I think when I first read that, I found that so useful. You know, as somebody who lives in the middle of England, seeing somebody recast that Wheel of the Year for me was a really important thing, because you're exactly what you say. How can you possibly celebrate Imbolc traditionally when actually your country's doing something different at that point? And I kind of think, that adaptation of the Wheel of the Year is a really important thing for us to do, particularly in light of kind of climate change and climate emergency. Our seasons don't always match up now with kind of where they, you know, what they used to. So I think as like an active Druid process, we should perhaps be relooking at that Wheel of the Year individually and adapting it to those kind of pressures, really.
Do you think that approach goes to the very root of what it means to be pagan pagans of the place, to centre your spirituality in where you actually live rather than where somebody else lived a couple of thousand years ago, and the climate and the environment of that time, that place?
I think you have to, because you've got to live your life now, yeah? Because the only thing you can really be sure of is that we're here in this world and we've got to experience it. So you've got to live it where you are. But that question about Southern Hemisphere is quite interesting, because it comes up a lot of time with tutees in Australia and America and things, yeah, when they're doing the Ogham, which is pronounced Ogham, but I'll say Ogham because then we know what we're talking about, because my Welsh is dreadful, yeah? They a set of trees, oak, ash, beech, etc. Yeah, and they say, well, we don't have them. Yeah, so what should we do? And you have to basically incorporate the ones you've got around you and make your own home of your own local trees. And I think Julie is one person who's done that. Yeah?
I agree. I find the spirit of place so important. Within Druidry, I kind of struggle to use the Irish terms, because I'm nowhere near Ireland, and it feels a little bit appropriative of me to be using that, because I don't have much Irish heritage. So I always tend to defer to the Welsh, just because of where I am, because, you know, Stratford is about an hour away from Wales. So that feels a little bit better. So exactly what you said, Robin, that spirit of place within Druidry is so important.
Yeah. I think this carries through. One of the issues I looked at in the Egyptian book was for people who, because the Egyptian religion was so centered in Egypt itself and the tides of the Nile, if you are somebody who doesn't live in Egypt, do you adhere to a calendar, which has now been disrupted by the Aswan Dam anyway, of the seasons of the Nile, or do you find your local river and find out its seasons, when it's high, when it's low, etc., and base your celebrations on the river that's half a mile down the road, rather than the river that might be 1,000 or however many miles away from you in a different country? There's no absolute answer to that one, but my own inclination is to always go local where possible, and to understand the local seasons, the local rivers, the local animals. So, you know, for somebody living in a part of the country, or whatever country, where maybe sheep aren't very important, but perhaps cows are, or goats are, or whatever the local popular farm animal happens to be. Instead of celebrating the lambing season, why not celebrate the calving season, or the kidding season for goats, or whatever the species that's important to your local area happens to be from the farming point of view.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Brendan.
I was going to say, you made a good point there, Andrew, about the Irish words not being relating very well to you. We had a wonderful talk at a Obod gathering once by Christopher Hughes on the Mabinogion, pronounced in excellent Welsh. Yeah? And of course, none of us knew what the hell was going on because we don't speak Welsh. Yeah? And I felt really sorry for him because he put life in it. It was a really good talk. Yeah?
Unless he says "Kuch," no one's going to know what's happening. Really.
Yes, he mispronounces them the way we can. We don't know what's going on. So you have to basically focus it to where you are now and what you understand, because we're all not going to start off by learning Welsh colloquially, are we?
Yeah, I think that, you know, exactly all of this that we've just been talking about is, plugging my book again, is kind of in here. This is what this is about. It's about adapting the seasonal mythology to where you are, both spiritually and physically, finding how that works around you, And that, for me, that adaptation is absolutely key. Yes, there are the big stories that we kind of need to know and kind of reflect on, but actually the more local you can make it, the more it works in your immediate area, the better, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned environmentalism. In Surrey, the Weald is on our doorstep, and shale oil gas extraction was a big thing a few years ago. And we were actually fortunate enough to be invited by the people of Cold Harbour in Surrey to come and lead a ceremony against the fracking site that was being put there. Yeah. And it was quite interesting to do. And believe it or not, we actually won, which is amazing. Yeah. So they're not doing it anymore. Yeah. So these things can happen. That's the local area. Druid activism doesn't have to be in your face. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Don't know if you found that at all. Anyone?
Yeah, I kind of joined Extinction Rebellion because I thought it was my duty as a Druid to do that. And actually, I mean, I respect very much what they do, but with it being within it for a very short period of time, I kind of realised it wasn't for me. You know, my activism kind of comes out in slightly different ways to the way that they are. I mean, like I say, I respect them completely for what they do. It just wasn't for me. I think there are different levels of activism that we can work with that kind of resonate with ourselves. And, you know,
Yeah.
Well,
That's good.
I have a somewhat different stance in that I avoid activist groups like the Plague. My experience is that they start well with good intentions and then invariably get derailed by deluded and self-important very, very quickly and conflated with all sorts of irrelevant issues. I prefer to work individually on that scale rather than get involved in the group side of things, because they seldom stay good for long. It's been my experience.
Yeah, so when we were talking in the intro before we came on, we said there are 3 Druids here, so they get 4 different views of Druidry. We already have, so there you go. Yeah, it's a very diverse, I wouldn't say church because some people don't view it as a religion, but a diverse spirituality, let's say. Yeah,
that's a whole different question, isn't it?
It's an interesting phrase though around whether it's Extinction Rebellion or any other kind of a cause for that matter. We think the ancient Druids, their role as advisors to kings and chieftains and queens and so on, that sort of political promise. But I'm sure not every Druid, just maybe the high-ranking ones. I dare say the lowly Druids were more involved in running jungle cells and things like that. But for the higher-ranking Druids having that political prominence, obviously these days, I can't imagine there's terribly many politicians who would give a flying donut what we think about anything. But we can nonetheless have an influence, albeit at a much smaller level, within a political, in a non-partisan, I hope, sort of a way. I think party politics, rather like activism, gets derailed very, very quickly and turns into something really quite ugly. But in terms of wanting the best for the country, whether that's Britain or any other country, for people listening to this podcast from other parts of the world, wanting the best for the place you live in is a requirement, I'd suggest, of Druids, that we are there as much to help the community we're in as to contemplate our own navels and achieve spiritual enlightenment for ourselves. It's a very interactive process for me, a very kind of tribal process. It's not just about self-fulfillment, it's about community engagement in whatever manner is suited to the individual.
there's an interesting corollary to that in that you kind of, by the way you live and behave, you influence people anyway. Yeah. So just by being yourself, living in a Druidic way, and being a decent person can have a very big effect on the community, often without you even knowing it. Yeah? People pick up the things you do and say and go on that way. Have you found that, Andrew? Or how do the people of Stratford respond to you?
I'm a covert Druid, very much. Every so often I kind of go, there is this thing that I do. I am a covert rather than an overt Druid mostly, but I genuinely find actually that people are really accepting of it. After the initial kind of, you don't sacrifice people, do you? And you're like, no, only at the cross-border festivals. That's all. Once you kind of get past that, people are genuinely interested. You know, I think the rising wave of environmental concern actually kind of has made Druidry look much more acceptable to people in a number of ways. I find that people are genuinely quite interested. They like, we've talked about the seasonal festivals, they find that interesting. You know, I'll get a lot of questions, well, what is Beltane? What is Imbolc? And there is a genuine interest in that. I'm seeing more and more people asking me about that personally. But I think people who are concerned about the environment are kind of accept that actually we need to be a bit more in touch with nature in general.
Yeah, quite so. Yeah. Aha, here's a question. It's come through. I've met people who describe themselves as Buddhist Druid or Christian
Really
Druid.
good.
To what extent do you see Druids being compatible with other traditions? Okay, who wants to take that first? Yeah. Is that a Robin one?
Well, if you treat Druidry as an abstract philosophy, which I appreciate a number of the orders do, then as an abstract philosophy, you could, to an extent, combine it with, well, possibly not every other religious persuasion. There might be some that doesn't fit well with, but you could certainly combine it with a lot. My own approach is polytheist Druidry, which goes outside the realm of abstract philosophy into something with a very specific understanding of theology. And that creates a bit of a dilemma in that, as a polytheist, I can accept the existence of a wide variety of deities I have no direct experience of. So I've got no particular objection to the notion that Christ or Allah or Vishnu or Ganesh are out there somewhere, even though I've not had any kind of intimate visionary experience of them. However, clearly there are some religions in which they would not be comfortable having someone who is a polytheist engaged with them, who would take a very hardline monotheist approach and say, no, there is one vision of deity. This is it. If you're following anything different, there's the door. And that's the polite version. So it depends on the style of Druidry that you are understand. So I've certainly been in ritual with people who are primarily Jewish. I say primarily, that was their central identity. And they found ways to adapt. If they were happy to do that, and likewise with Hindus and so on, that's never been a problem whatsoever. But then Hinduism is itself very open to multiple understandings of deity, so not an issue there. But I can see some religions that would have a problem with somebody turning up and saying, I am such and such a thing and a Druid as well.
Yeah, I think that basically the beauty of Druidry is there's no conception of deity as such, and you're totally au fait with putting that on yourself. So if you want to be a Christian Druid or a Buddhist Druid or even a pagan Druid, that's okay by me, yeah. And I happen to know I've had duties who have been Anglican priests, for instance, yeah, and they've combined that with Druidry, and they don't see any contradiction or problem with that. Neither do I, yeah. So I think there's no problem at all. Be a Buddhist, be a Christian, and be a Druid as well. Okay. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah. Well, I kind of come from a very mixed background. I went to a Church of England school. I did Jehovah's Witness training for a couple of years. I dabbled with Buddhism. As I said, I was vaguely pagan and a bad Wiccan for a while. So I actually come from this kind of multiple backgrounds. And for me, I see elements of Druidry in all of them. And for me, Druidry is just the best expression, which pulls together all the bits of those that I like. So I still like hanging around churches in a positive way, obviously. I love a church. And when you look up at the sculpture in the churches, and you see the leaves and the green man and all of that, it's kind of so intertwined for me. And just like you, Brendan, I know people who are priests who are kind of also working in the Obod area as well, in Druidry area. I think there is a great deal of crossover, and for me, it's about that acceptance. You know, can you accept somebody who's Christian? Well, yes, of course. And if it kind of works for them, I think it's a great way of developing with the beliefs.
Yeah, I think the beauty of Druidry is that we share a common practice, not a common belief. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the person who's standing next to you in the circle may believe something completely differently for you. It makes no difference at all. We can still be friends, still hold hands, and still share the moment. So no problem. Yeah. That was a good question, Trevor. Thanks so much. Oh, Here's a question from Tony Antoinette. How would you describe the difference between pagan and druidry? There you go. That's probably not one for me. Who's the pagan?
I had a brilliant expression of this, and it's not mine, but I do like it, and it might upset people. But so I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This came from, I heard it from somebody else, and they said pagans command things, druids ask nicely. And I thought that was a really good phrase. You know, you don't command the elements. A lot of pagans command the elements. Druids don't. They ask nicely, you know, can the North come and help us? And I just thought that was, although slightly offensive to pagans, sorry, but I do think that is a really nice description.
I suspect that's a strong overlap from ceremonial magic of command, which is essentially a Judeo-Christian practice rather than a pagan practice. One of the difficulties in answering Tony's question is that the meaning of both pagan and druid changes with the wind according to who you're asking. If we had hard and fast definitions, it would be a lot easier to give a hard and fast answer. If we're taking paganism to mean an embracement of the spirituality of nature and the multiplicity of deities and beings, then Druidry, in its ancient historical sense, was pagan. In its modern day post-romantic revival sense, it is sometimes pagan, but it's also sometimes atheist, it's sometimes agnostic, it's sometimes Christian, it's sometimes a dozen other things, depending on the brand or Druidry you're looking at. So you can be Druid and pagan, and you can be Druid, as said earlier, and Christian, you can be Druid and agnostic, you can be Druid and whatever, depending on how you define the word, if that's some sort of an answer for Tony's question.
Yeah, the summary seems to be, if you're a pagan druid, great, that's fine. Yeah, if you're not, okay, that's fine too. Yeah. There is a difference between you.
Ellen this morning outlined the meaning of the word pagan. It just means of the earth. So in that sense, there is no difference, is there really?
No.
If we take that.
That was another good question. That's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, here's another question.
Hey.
Can Druidry really be urban? Well, I guess I could answer that, but I think I will. I'll ask someone else first. Do you want to have a go, Andrew, at that one, or?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and this is where I think your work is really interesting. I think it can, but I think it's really hard. I mean, what you have to do is look at the little things. You've got to get kind of really used to like really looking and appreciating the little things. You know, I live in a market town which is quite green, but I remember there were days when I used to walk to work and I couldn't really see what was happening to the trees and things. And in that sense, I think it is very difficult. I would be really interested to hear more from you on this one, Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously that you can be, because most of us live in urban environments, and all urban environments actually teem with life. Yeah, you've got birds. Urban foxes are quite a thing. Yeah, they stroll around in broad daylight these days. Yeah, and it can be awkward because a friend of mine, Stuart, he lived in a block of flats, yeah, and he said he had to crane out of the window and lean out dangerously in order to see the moon, yeah, but he managed it. So if you live the urban environment, Druidry will still inspire you. You just got to be careful and look out and see. And learning to see, I think, is one of the key things, because we all walk around with blinkers on most of the time, concerned with our own little interior thoughts and worries and things, and you don't actually look around and see what's happening around you. And there are flowers, there are trees, there are birds, there are animals. Yeah, you can look at the sky. The sky is always free and it's always there most of the time. Yeah, you can see clouds, and you can, when you look up, you raise your spirits too, instead of casting yourself down. So looking up is quite good too. So I think it can be urban, but then I'm a convert for that anyway. What about you, Robin? What's your view? Yeah.
Well, it's a bit of an odd spell. I was giving a lecture the other week on eco-psychology at work, and this kind of comes into this rather odd split we've created in our own minds. Personally, I blame St. Augustine entirely for this split, although he would probably blame the Manichaeans, of the division between urban and rural, urbanus and paganus. It's a state of mind rather than a state of geography. in the state of where you live that we think increasingly as an urbanised people that nature is out there somewhere. You've got to get in a car, get on a bus, get on a train and go and visit nature. We forget that we are part of nature, that our homes are as much a manifestation of nature with all their concrete and plastic and glass rather, and junk, as a bird's nest or an anthill. It's a manifestation of nature. It's what we make, just as other species make their type of homes. This is our type of home with souped-up technology, but nonetheless, it's a manifestation of human nature. And that can be problematic. One element of interest, something we've done locally for quite a few years now, although this wretched lockdown has rather disrupted it. Our town charter was signed on the 25th of May in the year 1200. We've taken that as a date, the local pagan community, to honour the spirit of the town. What the Romans referred to as the Lares Prestates, the guiding spirit. It's very similar to the Christian idea of a patron saint. So a patron saint of London, of Bury St Edmunds, of Glasgow, etc. Within the Christian context, each community has its guardian saint. And in a polytheist pagan context, communities, whether they're tiny villages or vast cities, have their guardian spirits, the spirits of the landscape. And taking time out not just to commune with the spirits of the woodlands and the spirits of the seashore, but with the spirits of the town, the spirits of the city, the spirits of the village, I think is a worthwhile thing to do. You live there or maybe work there, perhaps somewhere you're visiting with a lot. Why not talk to the guardian spirit and find out what it wants? I do feel that if you're in an urban environment, which is maybe suffering a lot of problems, urban blight and crime and one thing and another, part of that may be helped by getting onto good terms with the spirit of place. The kind of fracture between people and spirit is part of what leads to individuals becoming violent or hitting the bottle or shooting up or living generally squalid, miserable, unpleasant lives, turning on each other because they don't have connection with place.
That's very important because in Druidry we have spirit of place and we have spirit of the times as well, so you can get in touch with what's happening around you as well. So that's also another urban type manifestation. Andrew, yeah.
There was a few years ago at Obod Eisteddfod. I remember somebody reading out a poem. I can't remember who it was, I'm afraid. So they'd written a poem to the spirit of a river. And it was a river that flowed through the middle of Bristol. And so it had all been kind of contained and kind of caged. And they kind of were working very closely with the spirit of that river. And it was a beautiful poem. And it just kind of exactly what you were saying, Robin, it kind of got me thinking about working with these natural elements, these spirits in an urban context and finding their voices and their spirits as we do. And I just thought it was an amazing piece of poetry.
That's true, yeah. Good. A question from Steve Richardson. Living in the city, what plants and herbs can I plant to create a Druidry urban garden? Oh, excellent. Well, there are lots of herbs that are quite prominent in Druidic history. Agumony is one, mullein is another, yeah. Those are herbs you can grow, yeah. But basically any herb or plant, as long as you plant it, care for it, appreciate it, is a Druidry urban garden, yeah. If you want rose bushes, they are also part of the natural world, yeah. So I think do what you want, basically. Yeah. Sounds like a cliche, but yes, do what you want and appreciate it. Anyone else? Andrew?
Yeah, I've planted most of the sacred ones. So I've got mugwort, meadowsweet, vervain, valerian, so many of those kind of sacred herbs, and I put them in little. I've got like a really small little yard out there. Although I live in Stratford, I don't have a garden. I have a tiny yard. I'm quite urban in that sense. And what happened, and this is why I love my garden so much, is that those herbs were in pots for a little while, and then as soon as I got around to next summer, they'd seeded in between the paving slabs. They're growing up the corners. My little backyard now is wild as anything. And there's vervain growing up through the floor. There's meadowsweet sprouting in pots where it wasn't before. You know, I've now brought in things like daisies and buttercups and teasels with the hope that those will do the same thing as well. So I think if you get a lot of these kind of very English herbs, they will do their own thing out there, and they will re-wild a little urban garden for you beautifully.
Yeah. Yes, I have an allotment, so I grow vervain and valerian and such like, yeah. And we have a sort of herb patch on it, which is about a third of it, and it's very useful, yeah.
Yeah, some of them go like wildfire. I mean, literally, the vervain, literally, it's so big I have to cut it back because it's kind of breaking up through the paving slab. I'm not quite sure what my landlord's going to think, but I love it. I mean, but,
that's called life force, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's gone from a little grey space with nothing in it to just when we get to this time of year, it just goes, and it's a joy. It's a joy. So just get all of those kind of native herbs in there, and they will do their own thing.
Yeah. What about you, Robin? What do you think?
Well, I'll go along with the advocacy both for native herbs and maybe a few imports. But I suppose the chief question is not so much an answer as a question to Steve himself as to what he intends to use his herbs for, because that will determine what he plants in the first place. Whether he's looking at it from a culinary perspective, just something he wants to make herb bread or stews or something like that with, or if he's intending to make medicinal concoctions, poultices, ointments, or grow his own products for making incense. What does he want to do with that garden? That will help him decide what plant should go into the garden in the first place. So it's the pragmatic answer. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, make it useful. Yeah. Aha, there's a good one. What's the key quality to have to succeed in Druidry? Oh, that'll cause us some thought. Anyone want to take that one? Or?
A good memory helps.
A good memory, yeah. I think openness is needed.
What is this herb again? What does it do?
I think you need to be open to things. You need to be open to experience, open to new ideas. Don't have a closed mind, and just go with the flow. You know when something is right, you feel it, yeah. So just go with yourself, trust yourself. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think for me, there's kind of I was going to say empathy, but it kind of goes beyond that, because for me, so much about Druidry is about connection. It's about connection with animals, with plants, with trees, with herbs. Even though I'm terrible with herbs, it's that connection of seeing yourself within a wider web of things, of sensing that connection and having that empathy for. There's a wonderful quote by Shakespeare. I'll just throw him in again as he's over the road. In Measure for Measure, there's a line somewhere that basically says the beetle that we tread upon has the terror of death the same way that we do. In other words, they feel the same as us. I think for me that's the biggest quality that I have really enjoyed developing, is that connection, that beyond empathy, if you like.
That's very good. Yeah, I think we've covered that one now. That's good.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah, we didn't come here to work, did we?
Sunday.
Oh dear, is walking in the park equivalent to forest bathing? Said someone. Yeah. Guess it can be. I think it can be. You think not? Let's hear from Robin then. Yeah.
Well, forest bathing, as I understand it from the Japanese idea, is partly to go somewhere. It's the length of time rather than a walk. So it's sitting and being still rather than walking, but also to be somewhere that is unmanaged, that's wild. Obviously, parks by their very nature are managed. They have park keepers to plant beds and pick up the needles from the junkies and all the rest of it. They're looked after environments, whereas an ancient forest or seashore, because it's not just forest bathing, seashore bathing, mountain bathing, you could have variations on that, is about getting out to somewhere where humanity has had very, very little input. And that's a very different quality of place, to be somewhere where there could be a bear or a wild boar or a wolf or a deer or A walk in the park is better than a kick in the teeth, I'll grant you that. But it's a walk in a managed environment rather than being present in as close to wilderness as is left on the planet these days.
Yeah, I take your point with them. You know, when you walk in a forest, you kind of relax and leave your cares behind. A lot of it is due to the volatile chemicals produced by the trees that you're walking through that you take in, yeah. And you still get some of that in a park when you're walking about, yeah. Not to the same extent, yeah. But I think it's better, as you say, than not doing it at all, yeah. Get out there and experience it if you can, yeah. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm going to stay out of this one, frankly. I'm going to say I don't really know enough about it. I mean, I think what you've both said, which is key, which is if you've got nothing else, then absolutely. But I also kind of take the idea of the managed space versus the wild space. But, you know, not everyone can get to those wild spaces, so it is better than nothing. But I am going to stay as far away from that one as I can and just say I agree with both of you.
There you go.
I think that's a particular problem for this country, in that we have destroyed 99% of wild space. What we have left is managed space, which is terribly British, isn't it? Everything managed and precise and ready for tea at 3. We lack passion and wildness and danger, because of course wild space is also dangerous space. Things can happen to wild space.
We've got a lovely bit down by the river in Stratford, which some local people have been fighting for recently, because our council is saying that they want to turn it into a nature reserve, but it's a nature reserve with picnic tables in the middle of wild spaces, which we're kind of pointing out isn't really a nature reserve. It's a place for tourists to go and eat sandwiches. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This beautiful, beautiful wild space, which I walk on an almost daily basis, is about to be ripped up, and we won't know what we've lost until it's gone. Most people, you know, it is a real shame. It is a real shame.
I was talking to some people from Sheffield a while ago, yeah, and you know, in Sheffield they decided to cut down all the trees in the streets, yeah, which was a feature of the place, yeah, just because they're buckling the pavements and they're untidy, you know. And I think this attitude is absolutely deplorable, yeah. We need trees, we need life around us, yeah, and as you say,
more trees, not fewer.
Absolutely. And as Robin was saying, a lot of forests are plantations now, yeah, where you've got nice straight rows of trees and things, yeah, and that clearly is wrong. It looks wrong, it feels wrong, yeah. We need to move away from that, yeah. Using it as a resource, yeah, and not as a thing in itself.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who's vegan, and I'm a vegan as well, when we were kind of talking about people's attitude to cows. And they say, well, if everyone went vegan, then you'd kill all the cows. And we're like, yeah, but that just assumes that cows only exist because they have a purpose for us. They were actually around before us. And, you know, the idea of vegans is not to kill all the cows. It's to have cows on their own merits. Just like we have, like you said about the woodland, let's have it on their own merits rather than something that is necessarily used by us.
Yeah, that's very sensible.
Unfortunately, we live in a society where things only have worth if they are of commercial value to somebody somewhere.
Yeah,
which isn't
I dare to
Right, we're down to about 2 minutes to go now, so do we have time for one more question if there is one? Or not? Oh, so it is, yeah. Can urban druids and wilderness druids interact? Aha, who's a wilderness druid?
Well, I think we kind of answered this earlier, didn't we? So if you put 2 druids in a room, you get 3 different answers. So they probably can, but who knows what will happen?
Yeah. I think in my view, they would be standing next to each other in a circle perfectly happily and doing the ceremony, yeah? It wouldn't make a difference, yeah.
It's all a bit Dungeons and Dragons, really, isn't
it? Yeah. I think I know some druids who do live in the wilderness, but they're quite rare and far between. Yeah, most of us tend to live in houses. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Even though I have to say, after the last 12 months, I can see the real benefits of living in a house in the middle of nowhere with just a wood and a field. I think that has become my dream in the last 12 months. Like, get me out of here.
Yeah, it's an ideal. Yeah, the year of COVID. Yeah.
Yeah.
stuck in. Yeah.
Yeah.
If we hadn't had the allotment, I would have gone mad, basically. Yeah, because we're like you, we don't have a garden, so yeah.
No.
Yeah,
I mean, literally, I mean, it's been quite hard because I live with someone who's extremely clinically vulnerable. So we literally locked ourselves in our house for 5 months, and we just didn't go out, and we actually locked in before the lockdown. So it was hard. Of course, during spring and summer, which are kind of peak time for druids, going out and seeing all that life kind of shooting up, it was really hard. So now I am really craving living in the middle of nowhere, I'll be honest.
good. So that's probably a good point to call a halt. We've run out of time now, so let's all go and live in the middle of nowhere.
I'm off
So-
now.
We've been the Druid Judes. Thank you for listening to us, and if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us. Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm sure Rachel will close us down any minute now. Yeah. He says.